people like to kick their year off on a high. I chose to start my year on a kind of a medium. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am taking you through all of the books that I read in January of this year. I kind of get into a little bit of a slump in January, so I'm not super surprised that it wasn't a big number, but I did do pretty okay. It took me a little while at the start of the year to actually kickstart my reading properly. I had a couple of DNFs that I wasn't getting into, maybe ones that I will go back to in another time, but it did take me a little bit of a while to find my flow this year. In January of 2024, I read 8 books and DNF'd a further 3 of them. Of those, 1 book was a physical, 1 book was an ebook, and 6 of those were an audiobook. That amounted to a total of 727 pages and 56 hours of reading, and all 8 books that I read in January were geared to an adult audience. As for the genres that I read, there were 4 romance books, 2 contemporary fiction books, 1 literary fiction, and 1 non-fiction. As for the star ratings, 1 book got a 4.5 stars, 2 books got 4 stars, 3 books had 3.5 stars, 1 book had a 2.5, and 1 book was given no rating because it was a non-fiction book. We'll start off with the DNFs, and the first book that I DNF'd in 2024 was You Again by Kate Goldbeck. This one actually really upset me to do because I was so looking forward to this one. It had a really great concept. I'd heard a lot of comparisons between this book and When Harry Met Sally, which is one of my favourite rom-com movies. But the 2 characters in here were so completely unlikable that it just completely took me out of the story. I found Josh in particular to be a real kind of a rich kid, nepo baby, walks into every great position that he's put in his life. And I also didn't really love Ari, but I didn't not love her to the extent that I didn't enjoy reading about Josh. There were a couple of situations in this book that I felt were a little bit too stretched out and too far-fetched for me to get on board with. And I also didn't really gel with the writing style. It felt very kind of condescending towards millennials. So I put this one down, and I don't think this is one I would be going back to. But a DNF that I probably will go back to is The Rommmate Risk by Talia Hibbert. I love Talia Hibbert's writing. I think this was just a wrong book at the wrong time. I think there was just something that I wasn't out of my little reading slump yet, and I needed to get myself back into gear with another book. I needed to kickstart my reading properly before I could go back to it. So maybe it'll happen in February because February is a big romance reading month. Maybe it'll happen a little bit later in the year. It might fit into a readathon later in the year, for example, or I might just pick it up on a random whim. But it just didn't cast me this time. My other DNF was my book for book club this month, and that was Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano. This shouldn't have been up my street. It was a historical fiction book. It was kind of loosely based on Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, one of, if not my favourite classical books, but it just did not work for me. I found the writing to be way too drawn out. I found it to be a little bit too flowery at times, and also I feel like it was written in the wrong time period for me. I think because of the comparisons with Little Women, I was expecting something that had been set in the late 1800s to early 1900s. This was actually set from a time encompassing 1982 to about 2005. Now, I did go to book club and I did read up about what would have happened had I finished the book so that I could take part in the discussions, so that I could give them my thoughts on what I had read up to then. And where I had let off, within maybe about 10 pages, something really big would have happened. But by that time, I was over 150 pages into the book, and I felt like I was waiting and waiting and waiting for something to kick off, but nothing was coming. And that's a little bit too long of a wait time for me to get anything ready, so I just laid this one to the side. So then, the books that I finished in January of this year, and the first one that I finished was Will They or Won't They by Ava Wilder. I read this on the recommendation of Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading. She put this on my 12 books from 12 friends list in 2024, and I had a really great time with this one. I don't think I was expecting it to be such a good book, but I had a really nice time. This is about Lila and Shane, who once starred together in a soap opera up to about 5 years before the book starts. During that time, Lila had gotten another job working on a kind of a sci-fi movie, but that movie has been tanked. Nothing is going to come of it further, and to bring her career back, she's going back to her roots, and she is going back to the TV show that she started her career on. Naturally, everyone on set feels a little bit like Lila has abandoned them. She's not exactly welcomed back with open arms. There are a lot of whispers in corners about her. There are a lot of filthy looks being thrown her way when she is approaching them in the hallway. But she and Shane used to have a kind of a fling together back when they were actually on set all the time. And that fizzled out for absolutely zero reason from Shane's point of view. Now that they are back together, now that they are back working together, it seems like the spark is about to reignite between the two of them. There was a lot about this book that made sense to me. I thought it was really realistic that Lila wasn't exactly given such a warm welcome when she had come back to the set, that she was a little bit ostracized by her co-stars because they had felt a little bit like she had abandoned them, because they felt a little bit like, oh, she's gotten a bit too big for her boots and now she has to come back and lick her wounds. I thought that that was written really well. There are also some other things that are written really well in this book, but one thing in particular is the anxiety and the panic attacks that Lila can sometimes suffer from. As somebody who also has anxiety, I thought that this was written so well. It was really approachable, it was really relatable to me, and I thought that it was dealt with in such a loving and careful way as well. There's great chemistry between Lila and Shane as well, and this is particularly evident when the two of them go on a chat show together, and Lila becomes the subject of a couple of questionable comments and questions themselves from the show's host. I feel like the reaction from Shane was really great. It was written so well. Something else really well written here was the sex scenes in this book. I wasn't expecting it to be super spicy, but it did have a little bit of spice thrown into it. It wasn't very gratuitous, it wasn't all shoved into your face at one time. It very much flowed well throughout the book. There was a good amount of it, it wasn't overbearing, and I thought it was written really well as well. I'm not sure if this is Ava Wilder's first book, but if there are other ones, I am definitely going to go and keep an eye out for that one, because this was one of the books that got 4 stars. To really kick my reading into gear, I knew I needed to bring out the big guns. I knew I needed to have a really big hitter that was going to settle me into the ear. Out came Act Your Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I know I've mentioned that Talia Hibbert was a DNF earlier in the month, but I knew that I loved this series so much that there was absolutely zero problem with me going back to this one, and I was completely correct. This was only my second reread of Act Your Age Eve Brown, whereas I've read Chloe and Danny's books, I think about 3 times each. So I was a little bit fresher with the story this time than I would have been with the other 2 books, which is why I went for this one and not the other 2. This follows Eve Brown, who is the youngest of the Brown sisters, and she has been told by her parents that she is being cut off from her trust fund. She has a whole year to get a job, hold it down, and to prove to her parents that she's a fine and upstanding and functioning member of society. So Eve heads out on a drive and comes across a B&B that is looking for a chef. She goes in, has an interview with Jacob and Monty, who are the owner and the chef respectively, and it doesn't exactly go well. Jacob isn't exactly as enamored by Eve as Monty is, so she leaves without the job offer. But as she is leaving the car park, she accidentally hits Jacob with her car and puts him into a cast. So for the next 6 weeks while Jacob is recuperating, Eve is brought on as the kind of dog's body of the hotel. She is basically the cook, she is a head waitress, she is housekeeping, she is the receptionist. She's basically doing all of these different kind of jobs. And once Jacob begins to see that Eve is really dedicated to her job, that she is not going to let any kind of challenges put her aside, they really start to thaw the ice between the two of them. There is almost nothing in this world that it seems that can keep him happy. And I really enjoyed the chemistry between Jacob and Eve. I really enjoyed the understanding that Eve has for Jacob. Jacob is autistic, and there are a couple of nuances and there are a couple of things about him that would seem a little bit quirky to her and to other neurotypical people. However, it does make Eve think about her own neuro pathways, and maybe she might not be as neurotypical as she thought she had been. Eve is like a chaotic whirlwind the entire way through this book, and I love how she is so unapologetically herself. I love how she just does not let anything stop her. I love how she will just blaze through life. But she is so loving, and she is so caring, and she is so gentle to her sisters, and she is so kind and gentle to Jacob as well, even in moments that he doesn't necessarily deserve the kindness and gentleness that she shows him. I truly loved this book. It's not my favourite of the series because that will always be Take a Hint, Danny Brown, but this is a very, very high up there one. This one got 4.5 stars because it is just that little bit off perfection, purely because it's not Danny Brown's book. Then I read my non-fiction book for the month, and that was I'll Be There For You by Kelsey Miller. This is, as you can tell from the title, all about the TV show Friends. It goes right from the initial conception of the TV show to the alternate titles that it could have gotten, to the casting situation, to actually filming the show, to some of the issues that had come up when they were filming, to the final season, to the negotiations about which would have been the final season, to its aftermath, to some of the impact that it is still having to this day. Obviously, if you, like me, are a Friends diehard fan, you are not really going to get anything new out of this book. There were a couple of things that I didn't know the full story about, or I hadn't heard a whole lot about it before, but quite a lot of this book was just regurgitating facts and figures and statistics that I had already known. It was, though, really great to see what the further impact of Friends has at the moment, especially in the area of the Me Too movement, especially in the area of Black Lives Matter. It's a really great way of looking at the show through a different lens. This year marks 20 years since the finale aired, so it's really interesting to see that it is still so beloved to this day, and the kind of situations that has put it in that light. As I said, non-fiction doesn't get a rating from me, so this one doesn't have any stars on it. Then we come to a slight disappointment for the month. I worship the ground that Taylor Jenkins Reid walks on. She could release the phone book and I would read it, but there was something about After I Do that just did not hit the mark for me. This one only got 2.5 stars from me, purely because I had worked it up so high in my head. Just because I loved the historical fiction book so much, because I loved her other contemporary books so much, this one did not work for me at all. It follows Ryan and Lauren, who have been together since they were about 15, 16, and they are now married for about 6 years, and things are going to shit. Their marriage is basically two strangers living in the same house who pick fights with each other constantly. We pick up the action as they are coming out of Dodger Stadium after watching a baseball game, arguing about where the car is parked. And once you've gotten to the stage of those petty little arguments almost ruining your relationship, it's time to take a break and walk away. So that's what they decide to do. They decide to go completely no contact for an entire year. Lauren and Ryan are going to move to different places. They are going to see other people. There is absolutely no problem with them doing this for this 1 year. And after the year is over, they're going to come back together and see if they actually want to pick back up or if they think they're better off separately. Even though they said that they would be in no contact for the entire year, there were points of this book where Lauren and Ryan would inject themselves into each other's lives in a way that really didn't sit well with me. I come from Europe, and over here there is a huge emphasis on GDPR, your General Data Protection Regulations. And it's something that is touted almost all the time if somebody is sending you an email from a mailing list that you didn't sign up to, or somebody has sent you a flyer in the mail that you really didn't want to get. GDPR is basically your cover all box for I don't want this contact, you shouldn't have my details. If this book had been set in Europe, I feel like GDPR rules would have been absolutely smashed to pieces about 15 times throughout this novel, and not in a way that sat in any way well with me. I feel like if they wanted to go for this no contact, if they wanted to separate their lives from each other for the entire year, that is what they should have done. They should have left everything lie for that entire year and not try and find out information from any other subterfuge-filled sources that they did. I understand what it is like to be in a relationship where you feel like you are basically arguing with them 24/7, 365. But these people were awful to each other. There was genuinely no hint of any kind of love or of affection between the two of them. To the point where I genuinely think they were better off separately. They were living better lives. They seemed to be happier. I know that it's always in the back of your mind, oh, I miss you. I wish you were still here. There are things that I want to tell you. But I really, really think Lauren and Ryan should not have been together. I am going to spoiler the ending of this book, so if you don't want to hear about what it's about, skip on to the next book because there will be a timestamp in the description. But by the end of the book, Lauren and Ryan get back together. They've been keeping an eye on each other through reading each other's email drafts, having already had the logins previously. Now, Sharing logins with your partner is something that is kind of an iffy situation for me anyway. I don't love the idea of my partner having all of my social media logins or knowing what my email login is. I'm fine with them having like a fingerprint set up on my phone or knowing the pattern that is needed to unlock my phone. But I'm so not okay with somebody having untethered access to my tweets, to my Reddit, to my Discord, mainly because that is where the unhingedness goes to die. By the end of the book, when Lauren and Ryan had gotten back together, there was absolutely no discussion of the problems that had caused them to separate in the first place. They just got back together in the car park of a hospital where Lauren's nephew was born and grandmother died within about 12 hours of each other. There was no point of this book where they sat down and said, these are the things that drove us apart. What can we do to make sure that that doesn't happen again? I don't want to lose you a second time. How can I not make that happen? It just infuriated me so much in that there was absolutely no growth or learning done in a year. Come on. So, you're back? Cool. As promised, we're going on to the next book, and that is The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. This blew me away. This was just a flippant, oh, it's available on Libby. I need an audiobook to get me through the workday. I'll just put this on. It blew me away. I had such a great time with this book. This book is about Patrick, who is also known as Gup, Gay Uncle Patrick. Before the beginning of this book, his best friend Sarah lost her life to cancer. And also, Patrick's brother Greg, who was married to Sarah, is going into rehab for alcohol addiction issues. Left behind are their two kids, Maisie, who is 6, and 4-year-old Grant. They need somebody to take care of them, so the obvious answer is Patrick, a 43-year-old washed up ex-soap star. Patrick takes the kids in for the summer and basically gives them all of the knowledge that he has brought out throughout his life. They are known as Gay Uncle Tips number 1 or Gay Uncle Tip number 5. And I promise you they were so funny, but also completely heartbreaking and heartwarming all at the same time. There was so much heart and there was so much warmth in this book. And it also dealt really well with so many aspects of dealing with grief. Not only is Patrick mourning his best friend, but also previously to the book, his partner Joe had lost his life in a car accident. And there is a lot of discussion about that when it seems that Patrick and Joe's relationship wasn't given the respect that it deserves because it was an LGBT relationship. There's a letter that Patrick writes to Joe after he passes away that is read out in the course of this book that had me in floods of tears. It was so heartwarming, but also completely heartbreaking. And this is also an exercise that he gives the two kids to do. And you can genuinely see the connection between the two kids and their mother come back to life a little bit. There's also a really sweet scene where they go out to the, I think it's the Mojave Desert, and look at shooting stars in the sky and basically proclaim one of them as the spirit of their mother, which just broke my heart so much. Something that I also loved so much was the audiobook narrator giving Grant a tiny little lisp and a really realistic 4-year-old's voice when being read by a fully grown adult male. This book gave me so much heart fuzziness. It really was such a great book that I genuinely did not expect it to be. The next 2 books that I read in January were Breakaway and Time to Shine. Those were hockey romances that I have covered in my hockey romance vlog that I did with Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading. It has just gone out, so I will direct you to here for my entire unfiltered thoughts about what I thought about those 2 books. But the final book that I'm going to talk to you about today is Winter by Ali Smith. I read this with Shannon from 155 Books and Amelia from Amelia Barlow Books. And this one did not hit us so well as it did with Autumn. I think the characters were something that just didn't gel with me this time. You know when you read a book and you notice something in the characters that this is like somebody that I know in real life, and I didn't particularly like them when I knew them. That's what happened with me and Sophia in this book. Sophia is quite old. She was born in the 1940s and she is now living in this sprawling country estate house all by herself because she has basically pushed away quite a few people in her life. But it is the lead up to Christmas and her son Arthur, or Art as he is commonly known, is coming back to spend Christmas with his mother. And he is supposed to be bringing his girlfriend Charlotte with him. The problem is that Charlotte and he broke up a couple of weeks ago, and he hasn't exactly told his mother what's happened. While he is on the way home one day, he spots Lux at a bus stop and offers her £1,000 to pretend to be his girlfriend over Christmas. That's kind of money that nobody can turn down, so Lux takes him up on the offer and comes back with him to Cornwall for Christmas. And Lux is not from the UK, Lux is Croatian, and the first thing that Sophia says to her is, "Are you from England? It doesn't sound like you are." But it sounds enough that you are English that I won't question it. That's a kind of a paraphrase of it, and as somebody who is an immigrant themselves, did not sit well with me at all. But I feel like this is a common mentality for people around Sophia's age, so I wasn't truly surprised by it. I didn't know that there was a fake dating situation in this book, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a fake dating, and I wouldn't in any way call this book a romance, but the subterfuge of that was entertaining and it was an interesting read. But the rest of the characters really brought the book down for me. There is also a really strange element where Sophia keeps imagining the disembodied head of a child following her around the house, and then the child starts to grow limbs. I felt like that was a little bit too far-fetched for me. This book is also based on the Shakespearean play Cymbeline, which is not one that I have ever read, nor is it one that I've ever seen. So I feel like I was missing a little bit of the context of what the similarities between Winter and Cymbeline are like. Maybe if it was something that I've already read, it might have made a little bit more sense to me, but I felt really lost. It was also a much bleaker picture of winter than I think I would have liked it to have been. It was a very depressing, it was a very bleak, it was a very cold and snowy winter. Even the snippets of Christmas that you get, they're not super pleasant, they're not super joyful. You're brought back to Christmas of 1977, which is the exact day that Charlie Chaplin passed away. And that is given such a huge focus in the book that I almost expected us to have a big discussion of Charlie Chaplin and his impact on cinema. It just didn't work for me overall. We will keep going with spring, we will keep going with it in around March or April, but I'm kind of glad that winter is behind me for more than one reason. Those are all of the books that I read or attempted to read in January of this year. How did your January reading going? Or like me, were you in a little bit of a slump for the start of the year? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then leave me a waving emoji so that we can wave goodbye to January together. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.